Thank you and welcome. I'm so glad you're all here. You're probably wondering what my connection is with submarine, the USS Utah. My father-in-law, my husband, and my oldest son are all submariners, and I did submarine repair. So the way I looked at it is they broke them, we fixed them. So, but they are the tip of the spear. They are the operators. They're the ones that go out and do the operations and the deployments. And what they do in the silent service is just amazing to know about what they do and then all the things that we don't know that they do. Those are amazing as well. But aloha and welcome to the celebration of a very special submarine, the Prospective Commissioning Unit. That's probably you're wondering what PCU stands for, and that's what it is. Prospective Commissioning Unit, USS Utah, SSN 801. This Virginia-class boat is the newest member of the Forging Ahead, a Legacy of Valor from Battleships to Submarines. She's only the second ship in the history of the Navy to be named after the state of Utah. Of course, the first was the Battleship, BB-31. And BB-31 was attacked on 7 December as part of the attack on Pearl Harbor, 1941. She is currently resting where she sank in the waters off Pearl Harbor on the backside of Ford Island, with 58 of her crew members eternally watching over the cremated ashes of a daughter of one of their sailors. With submarine USS Utah soon to be commissioned, she follows a line of submarines named after the mighty battleships of World War II as part of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. She will be commanded by Commander Chris Hornung, a native of Hauppauge, New York, a part of the Seaman to Admiral program. Commander Hornung earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from State of New York Maritime College in 2007 and a Master's of Art at Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. He served as ship's force on USS Memphis and USS Newport News and executive officer on USS Florida, with multiple deployments to the European and U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. Commander Hornung served his shore tours at the Naval Submarine School and Submarine Squadron 4, with his last posting as executive officer of the Naval Submarine School. Please join me in welcoming Commander Chris Hornung, the prospective commanding officer of the USS Utah, SSN 801.
You guys are a captive audience. Tomorrow, I only have 3 minutes to speak at the Utah Memorial, so today I get to really expand on that. So let's spend some time here getting to know each other a little bit. How many former submariners do I have or current submariners do I have in the room? Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Okay, so we've got about 5. Navy, former Navy. Okay, served, veterans. Awesome, good. That just means I'm going to talk more. It's going to just be more informative. Okay, so first I'm going to spend a little time talking about myself, my history, and then I'm going to allow my crew to introduce themselves. And then we have a brief presentation planned for you, and then we'll talk to you a little bit about what it is to build the submarine, how that's kind of a different mission than an operational unit. We'll talk about some of the history of the Utah, the previous one that's still out there, sunk in Pearl Harbor, and the tie-in that we have here with the commissioning committee and the work that we're doing with the state of Utah to have the second ship named after the state, which is really exciting. So myself, I was prior enlisted. I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and most of the sailors that I serve with today, they weren't born. So it's a little bit different for me. I've become the old man in the room. I had 23 years active service in February. So I enlisted in Brooklyn and went to boot camp in wonderful Chicago. Wonderful weather like here. It was winter in February 2002. And everything was iced over, so we were walking everywhere. There wasn't a lot of marching. But I got my commission through the Navy in the Seaman Admiral program. That's where they sent me to college, and I got a mechanical engineering degree. And I wanted to be on submarines. That's what I wanted to do from the get-go. And that put me on this path here. And then you heard the track record of ships that I've served on before I took command of the pre-commissioned unit, Utah, which you see before here. This is actually a picture of us in the shipyard right there. That's the bow, or the sonar screen that you can see. And the taped over portion there is actually one of our chin arrays. It's high frequency sonar that can really accurately map the bottom. So that's kind of what you're seeing there. And these are actually the awesome Americans that are busy at work building this ship right now. And this was an award ceremony where we presented a flag to them signed by the crew, thanking them for their efforts. at building these ships. It's quite an enormous, complex task, building a modern nuclear submarine. So I'm going to take a moment here and just allow my crew to introduce themselves. Cobb.
Hi, Master Chief Zach Nielsen. Chief of Boat.
David Spizak, I'm the Engineering Department Master Chief. Elliott, I'm the Electrical Division LPO.
Hey, good afternoon, I'm Matt Yakin, I'm the Quality Assurance Officer on board.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so I covered this a little bit. Yep, there's Chief of the Boat, Commanding Officer, and our fine gentleman there, the Executive Officer, that's Jeff Geis. He's home holding up the fort right now. And he did a tremendous amount of work helping us arrange this trip to come together. He's actually going to move and be stationed in Hawaii here in the next month. So he's coming to this beautiful area, and we're really happy for him on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I'm going to go over here for you. This is a picture that we had of the crew where we went out to the Battleship Massachusetts, which is right down the road from where we're at. She's actually a South Dakota class battleship, served in World War II. So one of the first things that I recognized when I got to the boat is there's nobody there when you stand up a command that hasn't existed in the past since World War II. So they start sending phases of sailors to it in increments. Right now we have mostly the engineering increments, and we're starting to see the folks that serve in the forward rates, like our torpedo men, our navigation teams, our quartermasters, our electronic specialists, the rest of the half of the boat. Right now, the majority of our crew are the nuclear operators. And we went out to the Massachusetts here to just tie in a little bit of history and what the engineering rates do through history. So total, when we're manned up, it'll be about 140 people. It's supposed to be, and it will be one day, an integrated crew. So that means there will be women and men serving next to each other on the submarine. The Florida was an integrated crew that I was on too. So if anyone has questions on that, I can answer that as well. Sea tour lengths on average, if you're assigned to the boat as an enlistman, you're 54 months. Most of my officers are about 32, 36 months on board before they'll transfer for a sea tour. And the XO, that's the hardest job I think on the boat. He's 20 months, 22 months. And then he moves along, and then myself, 32 to 34 months. Next slide, please. All right, this is our crest. So this we actually just went official within the last month. And Viva Fortis et Liber the motto is live strong and free, and that's it in Latin. And what you're seeing there is the Wasatch Mountains, which are in Utah. The stars are the constellation that flies over those mountains. Naturally, the crest is the border of the state. And then honoring our past here, the beehive is the state symbol for that community, that sense of teamwork and the culture that is Utah. But you can see the silhouette of Battleship BB-31, the USS Utah. So it's a connection of the legacy between the two ships. A little bit about the history of Utah. I was very fascinated about this when I learned I was going to take command of her. So in that configuration that you see there is actually right before, that was probably mid-20s. She was originally a Florida class. So around World War I, the way nations competed, superpowers at the time, was battleships, right? They were the dominant symbol of a nation's power, right? That's what countries had arms races on. They built these massive ships like this that cost a lot of money. They could project an enormous amount of firepower from the sea lanes that they would travel and patrol. And this was really like, again, how nations competed. So if you think of like the Battle of Jutland, the war between England and Germany for World War I, it was a naval arms race that put those nations basically on collision courses. Now, as we came out of that conflict, due to treaties that we had signed, she was redesignated into a training role, which is very near and dear to my heart. So she was disarmed to a certain extent, and a lot of anti-aircraft equipment was put on board her to train crewmen who would go forth and serve in the Pacific Fleet throughout World War II. She was actually even used as a bombing target, which is kind of fascinating. Nowadays, the way we train, it would blow your mind. Like I could take my crew to a multi-million-dollar trainer and put them in an immersive environment that you would be hard-pressed to tell whether it was real or not. It's a full mock-up of the control room of a submarine. The environment's modeled, all the sensors are active. Everything you could possibly imagine that you would see as a physical stimulus on board a submarine is there and simulated. They didn't have those luxuries back then. So what Utah did in this training role is they would put railroad ties basically on her deck, and pilots would drop dummy bombs on her, which is significant if you think about it, because that was her predominant mission prior to December 7th. So if you were a pilot who flew off of our carriers like Enterprise, Lexington, Saratoga, and you fought at the Battle of like Coral Sea or Midway, the first time you pitched dive on a Dauntless dive bomber, and were diving in to attack a Japanese flat top, the last time you probably did that in training was on the Utah. So that's what we like to call, that's a force-wide impact, is a ship like this, and the training that she provided her crew. The anti-aircraft guns that were put on her were many crew from the battleships that were here at Pearl Harbor that were sunk that day, trained on this ship before they went to the fleet. The 5-inch 38s, which was a very famous dual-purpose surface to surface, in other words, it could shoot ships or it could shoot aircraft, were mounted on this ship. The systems on how to aim them, how to operate them, 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. It was a training platform. There were so many sailors that trained on this boat that went forth into the conflict of World War II with that knowledge that just grew on it. Because after December 7th, your training was in the field, and you survived, and you brought it back, and kept training until that day. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is a fascinating picture. Modern submarine construction now is modular. The Germans actually invented this process. But different parts of the ship are produced either down in Norfolk, Virginia, or up in Connecticut, and then they're shipped on barges. When I arrived and took command, sections 6 and 7, 8 and 9 were actually joined together, and the engineering spaces were complete. Section 2B through 5, like the central part of the ship, was still forward, not welded yet, and the bow had yet to arrive. That was coming up on a barge from Virginia. Since the time that I took command in September 1st, and I have a picture here at the end, she's now pressure hull complete. All those portions have been joined together. And it's been a fascinating process to watch, because it requires a tremendous amount of coordination and skill to make sure you basically slide those components accurately onto one another, and then you weld them as well. Next slide, please. So this is actually the Idaho. This is a Virginia-class submarine rolled out from the main building at Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut. And over there on the front right, you can see how the bow of the Utah arrived there on the pontoon. And that's how it got shipped to us. And everything you see here, there's all these crisscross railroad tracks. And they have these electric operated carts basically that they can ship the submarine any direction they want. And they can move all these components around and line them up and finally join them and weld them together, or take an entire submarine from inside the building and out and put it on this right here is known as the pontoon, this right down here, and that will submerge and lower the ship gently into the water so she's launched. So it's really an incredible industrial process. So we'll be pressure hull complete here at the end of the year, and we're working our way towards reactor plant testing and certification. So what's that? That's a pretty big deal. It's the first time we're going to take the reactor in this ship, what we call critical. That means the reactor's actually, we started it up and it's running. So we'll spend an enormous amount of time studying on the physics, the safety precautions, our emergency procedures, all the testing parameters to make sure all the physics and it performs as designed. So it's highly scrutinized, and it's going to be a lot of long days. It's worse than a deployment, I would say. As far as like the time you have to spend on board, it's easier to deploy in my opinion, because you leave, you go do your job, you come back. In this circumstance, the crew is going to have to stay with many long hours of work, and they go home only to kind of get teased of the relaxed, nice pleasures of home, and it's right back to work. So it's a lot harder in a way. After that, you have crew habitability. That means we can move on board the ship. All the living spaces are there. The galley's up and running. We're serving food to the crew. And then we'll shift our training mindset to preparing her for sea trials. That's where we take her out to sea the first time. Next slide. Sea trials. Okay, sea trials, alpha trials, Bravo trials, and insert. It's just a series of putting the ship through its paces, right, on its way to delivery to the fleet. So up until in-serve, it's actually the property of Electric Boat. Now, I am the captain, but it's a shared responsibility which is unique. Because we haven't signed for it and accepted delivery. It's a unique relationship building a submarine. Be kind of like showing up at GM to like work on your car before you bought it at the ocean for about a year. I bet most of you would frown upon that. And then if it was broken, you might have to show up to fix it before you get paid for it. But anyhow, that's what we do. And then in-serve is like the final, you put it through all the paces, you test all the ship systems, and then it's yours. And then you go on your way to delivery and the commissioning, and that's when it turns from pre-commission unit to USS, which is United States ship. Now that's officially on the operational combat roster for the fleet. So this is a Virginia-class submarine. Who here knows what submarines do? What do you think we do? Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Monitor.
Monitor. Yeah, that's a good word, I would say. Ultimately, a submarine, if it's used for its design purpose, the world is in a really bad place. Because it's ultimately a vessel for controlling the sea. And how do you control the sea? You destroy your adversary. Right? That's what we did with Japan. The submarine force was a key component of that, putting over 40% of the total flagged Japanese surface fleet on the bottom was done by submarines. Right? By taking control of the sea, you can strip commerce and the economy away from your enemy, and then you can exploit the use of that sea. You can move troops. You can land them on islands, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, ultimately potentially Japan, the beaches of Omaha, right, and the Normandy beaches, right? That's exploitation after you wrestle control of the sea from your enemy. The global war on terror was unique. Those were the conditions that I joined the Navy under, and that was a lot of monitoring. So submarines are the most clandestine platform in the U.S. military inventory. We can go places without adversaries knowing we're there. And we can monitor, to use that word for conversation purposes, and then that information can serve the whole national security complex to do other things. Track down terrorist cells, things of that nature, participate in strike, launch Tomahawk missiles that can come out of the sea and strike land-based targets without any prior warning your adversary had. The ship that I served on, the Florida, took out Gaddafi's Air Force in 45 minutes, and there was nothing he could do about that. He had no way of knowing that a submarine was off his coast until it was too late. And then, naturally, a big mission is strategic defense, the Columbia class and the Ohio class, which carry nuclear missiles, right? You can't find them. It's always guaranteed that you have them, and that any other nuclear nation in the world can't take ours out, so that mutually assured destruction basically prevents people from shooting nuclear weapons at each other. You can't guarantee that you'll take all ours out, because you can't find ours. And tracking other nations' submarines is probably the biggest role we do. The only way you're going to find a submarine, generally speaking, and stay close on them, is with a knife. Next slide. Okay. Another thing that we do here is we work with the commissioning committee. We're really excited. They'll be out at the Utah Memorial tomorrow and on December 7th. They represent the state. You know, we'll make trips out to the state. We'll meet with like representatives from the state and industry and government, colleges, schools, like promoting recruiting into the Navy, participating in Pioneer Day, and they're extraordinarily super helpful in helping establish welfare and well-being for the crew as we're standing up the command. So they're a key contributor to morale and team building events, just like this one here today. It was most gracious of them. They actually they afforded us a gift and flew the crew out to be here today for the memorial tomorrow, the Sundown Memorial for the Utah, and also December 7th. And there she is. This is PCU Utah today. And you can get an idea of the size. That you got a small human right there. And the vast majority of it, you don't really appreciate it when it's in the water because there's only about 4.5, 5 feet of freeboard when they're fully loaded. So the vast majority of it is underwater. Just shy of 8,000 tons, 343 feet. Average crew complement 140, but depending on your missions, you could get as many as 180 on board. It gets a little tight. Best food in the fleet, really good eating, and just an incredible experience. It's been extraordinarily rewarding. So that marks the completion of my prepared remarks. Now I'll open up for some Q&A. Sir.
Yeah, you said you knew from the beginning that you wanted to be a submariner. What led to that decision, and how have you reflected on that throughout your career?
The gentleman asked how I knew I wanted to be a submariner. So most submariners, we're a bit nerdy. Just gonna throw that out there, right? So a strong, like sci-fi drive for me. You know, like the stories of Star Trek when I was a kid and Star Wars, and the closest thing I could find on Earth was a nuclear submarine, right? That was in my childhood. And then as I learned of like the mission that they do, the secrecy of it, my attraction to it only grew. On a complete opposite, the toss-up was between that or armored warfare, if you can imagine two completely different magnitudes of serving, both confined spaces, oddly enough. That's probably the only shared commonality between the two. But yeah, it was a keen sense of history, what the submarine force had done. Fascinated with naval history, military history in general, and it just made sense. It made sense. Yes?
Yes, the designers that designed the submarine, did they come up with the conception of studying the fish, like the catfish, because the submarine always remind me of a fish. Did they study the fish?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic point you make, because if you go out and look at Balfin out there, right, that doesn't look much like a fish. It looks more like a boat. And because that submarine class originally was designed to submerge for limited periods of time. And for a while there, even the Nautilus, which was the first nuclear-powered vessel ever, didn't quite form to a ship shape. Now, we did a test on a ship called the Albacore, named after a fish, rightly so, looking at the shapes of fish and their hydrodynamic performance underwater. And that was a test bed to get higher speeds underwater, you know, taken right from history, right from nature. Exactly, and the albacore form later became known, Cobb back me up, teardrop form. Was more hydrodynamic. Nuclear submarines are faster underwater than when they're on the surface because that produces a lot of drag. And that's when that form that you see now has been the traditional form for submarines.
Because when you were saying about the water and stuff like that, I know you in the water, you got to be going with what's happening in the water. You know, you got to adapt to what's going on, fish and everything that's down there. You got to balance yourself to be exactly there like that, so you can be undiscovered.
Absolutely. You need to master three things: yourself, your enemy, and the environment. You're right. Excellent. Yes, ma'am.
What's the longest that you can stay out without coming in and getting supplies?
Yeah. The question is, what's the longest that we could stay out? Depending on the limiting aspect is the human being on a nuclear submarine. It's capable. It makes its own water, makes its own oxygen. The nuclear reactor, for example, the reactor in the Virginia class is designed to last the life of the ship in excess of 50 years. It will never need to be refueled. So the limiting item is people. So we'll store that out with as much food as possible, depending on what we're going to do. In certain cases, like you'll stack it on the floor and you'll walk on it, and you'll eat down through back to the original floor throughout deployment. But it's in excess of 90 days. We could squeeze it out and get longer on that, but that's the limiting item, right? We can resupply overseas though. Right, that's the importance of alliance, is having friends in the world. Yes, sir.
Besides the responsibilities you mentioned earlier, do the submarines also accompany the aircraft carriers and guard and protect them, or that's other ships within the fleet?
At times. It depends on what the risk to the carrier is. It's generally not like a normal assignment to just be part of a task force with a carrier. But if a threat profile warrants it, a submarine could be part of that protection. Yes, ma'am.
How long do you generally stay submerged for before you come back up?
Normal mission periods are 4-6 weeks, maybe as long as 7. Believe it or not, it's way more comfortable submerged. They're not very stable on the surface. They tend to rock and they don't have a natural rhythm. To give you an idea, I did one deployment, 103 days submerged, 3 days off. But yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to get out, we want to dive and stay submerged. The ship at certain depths, like for example, at 400 feet, it feels just like this room. You wouldn't notice it. Yes, sir.
When is commissioning scheduled, and has an initial home port tentatively been identified?
The initial home port will be Groton. Most boats, when were constructed in either Norfolk or in Groton, they'll spend usually 1 year to 2 years at the port closest to the shipyard to complete any repairs or any work that's come out of the initial construction. And commissioning for her probably sometime late 2027. Question? Yes, sir.
Skipper, during early phases of construction, the ship is assembled. At what point do you lay it down?
At Point Quonset, they'll construct the modules. I'm not exactly sure when certain ones are tipped over basically horizontal like you see it. But yeah, there are certain portions that it just makes more sense depending on what components in that space that it's built in a vertical kind of initial orientation before it's laid over. The reactor compartment, for example, that's actually not one of those spaces. That's horizontal the whole time the way they build that because it sits on a floating deck. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any kind of testing, losing my voice, is there any kind of testing for your sailors to make sure that they can handle that type of environment?
Yes. So the question is there any type of testing for our sailors that they can handle that type of environment? Whether you enlist or become an officer, there is mental health screening, psychological screening, medical record review from early on childhood. We look for those things. Not necessarily anything unique to the submarine force, but I mean, naturally, if you said you were claustrophobic, which is a question that's problematic. But that's less of like a mental health issue that would develop. Some things just develop over time, because it is very strenuous, it's very demanding, and you might not have seen any issues as growing up, and it's just not a fit for you. Tom.
So I'm going to kind of go along that same line of questioning you were just answering. People can go onto the boat today to make things more comfortable for your crew each day than what they'll see if they go on the boat in.
They're laughing.
Still looks the same.
I'll give you an idea. It's a great question. Well, first, it's hard for sailors today to think about what life was like on the Bowfin out there. Bowfin, right? They didn't have a nuclear reactor. And a nuclear reactor can make a lot of fresh water, right? It can power, a desalinization unit. And if you're not in an environment where basically controlling the amount of water that you have to discharge overboard, right, which makes sound, which is not a good thing in the world of submarines, you're gonna have a pretty healthy shower, which is not a thing that submariners of the past ever enjoyed. I think that's something that. And that's where the phrase that we have in the submarine force, and the few submariners that I saw in here, they'll recognize this immediately. They take a Hollywood shower. That's what we call it. Because most of the showers on a submarine, you go in and there's a cutoff valve right on the shower head, and you turn it on, get yourself wet, turn it off, suds up, turn it on, rinse off, shut it right off. Because preserving water, depending on where you are and what operations you're doing, is key. And there might be even certain points where you shift to just paper plates, right? And you minimize the amount of, and nowadays that's really designed to minimize what you put overboard, right? Because discharging water overboard is not as simple as dumping it overboard. The sea, at the depths we're at, there's pressure, and you have to overcome that pressure with a motive force, and that makes sound. And that becomes one of your limiting factors. The food, like having the chill boxes, the freeze boxes, the size of those, just those storage rooms, and the power that they require, not being a matter of concern for a nuclear submarine is in advance. You'll laugh, but having like an outlet in each of your racks. I know some sailors that have set up like some pretty extreme gaming centers just in a rack that maybe is the size of 2 coffins. But that's starkly different than what a World War II or a diesel boat submariner would have experienced. Just having that power is pretty phenomenal. And now you get a little bit more email. Not quite like the surface fleet. Surface fleet can FaceTime and do things like that. That's not something we can do. When a submarine submerges, that's it. There's no GPS, there's none of that. Right? So you're very limited in your communications, but it's way better than what it was during the Cold War, where you sent, let's see, sailograms, which was 50 words. 50 words. No more, no less. So families learn to talk very efficiently in code and cover down on multiple meanings with like 2 words. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
What is the difference in their uniforms, rank?
Yeah, rank, enlisted versus officer. Yes, exactly.
So what if someone like gets sick on the ship and y'all are submerged? Like, what happens? Is there a quarantine?
That's an outstanding question. Yes. So prior to going on like a deployment, for example, the amount of like right now as we speak, like the dental folks up in Groton, they have me on their hit list. Right. And they're calling me, leaving messages. They're like, Captain, you're a class 4, you can't go to sea. I'm like, as it turns out, now you let her kid my submarine. So that's bad on me. I need to get to dental. But there's a lot of medical screening to make sure that everything checks out, from allergies to the healthier. Believe it or not, like I had to get a sonarman off in the Gulf of Aden, 2016, because the root canal went bad. And we surfaced. I rendezvoused with a destroyer, one of the gray holes that you see out there, and they sent over a rib. We tossed them in the rib, went back down, got right back into mission, and then we picked them up 2 weeks later. That's called a medevac, which gets to the core of your question. What happens if you're sick? So a lot of that screening in advance prevents those sort of things. Dental allergies, things like that, tend to be the #1 problems that kind of crop up if you don't take care of your teeth, believe it or not. But there's always an operational element. There's always an operational element in the plan to how far you are from help, because you might have to pull away from something crucial that you're doing. Like submarines will spend months training for a specific mission, and sometimes where we go in the world, you spend a lot of time getting there. So the pull away from that can be a total loss on something that we're there to do that only happens a certain time of year. So we really need to make sure that our people are top-notch health, that there's no chronic issues that might crop up. And then on board, we have a medical corpsman, a person who's specialized and trained in certain medical conditions. Even could do like an appendix, even though I'm not interested in that, just to be honest. Great question, awesome question. All right. How are we on time? Good? I have nothing but time. My first time in Hawaii, and my family and my kids, we're waking up at 5 in the morning. We don't know what to do with ourselves. We're still trying to adjust to the time. It's rough. I saw another couple hands come up. Yes, ma'am.
My question is for you specifically. What do you anticipate will be the biggest challenge or the most stressful part as you are commander?
The biggest challenge is I'm already what you call a corporate man. 23 years in uniform, there's no convincing me, right? It's trying to connect with younger people and trying to make them understand how crucial their role is, when sometimes the work they do can be very tedious, repetitive in nature. It's very hard to see how that is somehow attached to the sovereignty of our nation, the power of our economy, and global stability, right? Trying to explain that to 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I didn't even see it until probably, I mean, I might have had a better idea going back to that nerd comment that I made in my immense interest in history. Like, there was an appreciation for it. But even then, like, the daily grind, you lose touch with that. And when the people working for you don't have meaning in their work, that's a very challenging place to be. And in building a submarine, the unique nature of it is we engage in certain aspects of the construction where the crew is necessary for the testing, and then we back out. Because the crew's not going to weld the hull together, right? The welding shop, the pipe fitters, the union workers at Electric Boat do that. So we have to kind of watch, if you will, right? Monitor the progress. One of the things we're doing differently on the boat, since there's been a large, downsizing in manpower and mainly experience in building complex machines like this, is just being a more active customer is what we call it. Just because I have a lot of experience and a lot of smart people on my team, and they could sit in an office or they can collaborate with the young engineers and folks trying to handle the challenges of building a submarine and come through problems faster so that we can actually get her to the fleet more on time and with less delays. But it's hard to, that's my biggest challenge, is keeping those people motivated, taking care of them and everything. I have an awesome cop, I have an awesome team. It's a family. Everyone understands, we'll do anything for anybody in crisis, anything like that. But that comes easy. It's connecting with them, the purpose and the meaning of their work in this unique mission that's building a submarine, which isn't, for example, going to sail down the Thames next week, like my good friends, and they're going to go on a mission. And it's very real at that point. It's very real. You don't have to spend that much time on the why are we out here doing this kind of thing. Does that answer your question? Okay, good question. Sir?
What's it cost?
What's it cost? Monetarily, are you asking, or psychologically? I'd say what? 2.53 billion a pop. Yeah. Over 50 years. That's the one thing that people forget. That's money well spent. But to give you an idea of the power of a nuclear submarine, right? Maybe 3 or 4 of them could shut down the Strait of Hormuz. 3 or 4. Just them being there. That's power. How many? Right now there's 25 Virginia class, 12 Ohio, 4 SSGNs. Those were prior Ohios that were converted to carry Tomahawks. I served on one of them. And got about 2688 still mulling around. About 3 Seawolves, so 57. Yeah. Not too many. Not as many as there were during the Cold War. That's for sure. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
How many were there during the Cold War?
I'm sorry?
How many were there during the Cold War?
I think at a certain point we got up to $120 maybe, 120, 150. And we had a mixed fleet. We had nuclear and diesel as well, right? 2 different types of propulsion plants. Whereas now we're strictly straight. Every submarine in the U.S. inventory is nuclear powered. Yes, ma'am.
How fast are you traveling when you're underwater? And do you have any other major threats besides crew and additional submarines when you're down there? Or?
In excess of 20 knots is what I could say. Threats? The sea itself is always a threat. Enemy submarines, enemy aircraft, bottom-based systems that are on the bottom that are designed to monitor and listen. Trust me, nothing I'm telling you here is classified. You're not getting anything. You can look all this up. Surface ships. Basically, anything's out there, including like in certain parts of the world, like fishing fleets are paid if you spot a periscope to report it back. It's kind of like a bounty. So, yeah. Remain undetected. That's the #1 rule. Period. Thou shalt not violate that. Good question. All right. Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank you and your crew for your service.
Thank you. We appreciate your trust.